Welcome to the Reluctant Chaplain podcast. I'm Les Hicks. I'm filling in for Rob Kloss today. He's away and contacted a whole bunch of good people to talk, and instead he got hold of me. Actually, I've been on before, and he reached out and said if I could fill in for him, I'd be glad to. And it's my honor, absolutely my honor. Let's begin with a little bit of prayer, and then we're going to jump right into the third chapter of Ruth. Father, we thank you for this time. We thank you for your word, how it's both amazing and mysterious, and also very, very practical and very, very uh, in our face and in our lives. And Father, we ask you to open our eyes, open our heart as we walk through this chapter quickly and to get to know you better and your history better and where you plan on taking your Israel nation as you get ready to prepare a way to bring your Messiah in the New Testament. We ask you to clarify my words, make me easy to hear, and we ask this in your son's name. Amen. The Book of Ruth is an amazing book. I've loved it since I went through seminary. I taught some Hebrew at some places, and one of the things we had to translate was parts of Ruth. It's a book that really is an interesting story because if you just read it and don't really think much about it, it's just a story about this wonderful woman, her family, and how a Gentile is brought into the line of David and ultimately into the line of the Messiah. So we're going to follow the pattern that Rob usually does. I'm only going to read the text once today in the ESV, and then we're going to walk through, and I'm going to hit you with as much as I can in the matter of time I have. So if you have a Bible and you can open it to Ruth chapter 3, chapter 3 is another scene in the story. Ruth has gone through various portions of her life, and each one of these chapters kind of gives you a scene, much like a movie would. If you are ever reading a story in the Old Testament and New Testament too, the authors pick scenes. They pick elements they want to reveal. And Ruth is really written a lot like a play almost in the way it's written. And so you get these moments where the scene changes, where the events change, but they have an impact on what was coming and what is moving forward. And we have that in chapter 3. So let me read it to you. I'll try to read kind of slow and we'll go through it, then we'll talk here a second. So chapter 3 says this. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative, with whose young women you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Wash, therefore, and anoint yourself, and put on your cloak, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." And she replied, "All that you say, I will do." So she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had communicated to her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Then she came softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. At midnight, the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman laying at his feet. And he said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." And he said, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made the last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, wherever poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask, and all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. And now it is true that I am a redeemer. Yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. Remain tonight, and in the morning, if he will redeem you, good. Let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then, as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lay down until the morning. So she lay at his feet until the morning, but arose before one could recognize another. And he said, "Let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor." And he said, "Bring the garment you are wearing and hold it." And she held it, and he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her. Then she went into the city, and when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, "How did it fare, my daughter?" Then she told her all that the man had done for her, saying, "These 6 measures of barley he gave to me, For he said to me, you must not go back empty-handed to your daughter-in-law, excuse me, to your mother-in-law. She replied, wait, my daughter, until you learn, until the matter turns out. For the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today. This story is very interesting. And at some level, it raises a lot of questions like, why do they do it this way? How do they do it this way? And the cultural context actually drives so much of it. So, for example, the threshing floor is a place where they would bring in their grain of any type, and they would use a fork to blow it up in the air after kind of crushing it a little bit, and the wasteful material would blow away, and what would fall would be the grain. So it's not an uncommon thing. The culture would have understood what this was. And one of the things that happens, we know this from culturally, is that because it's mostly men down there, and because of the culture of the day, and Rob actually raised the question and raised the issue of during Judges, you have the nation of Israel not necessarily walking beside God through the law that they were given. They were doing things their own way, and a lot of it caused problems. In fact, the famine that is taking place prior to these events is typically viewed as God stepping in and saying enough. In fact, one of the ironies at the very beginning is that the family of Naomi comes from the town of Bethlehem, and that means house of bread. And the irony and the joke kind of in the text is that there is no bread at the house of bread. So it's the idea that God is doing something here, and this famine is designed to draw the nation back to him. This story, like Rob had said, was written and is really closely connected to the book of Judges. In the book of Judges, you have a cycle where Israel will do what's right. They'll follow God. They'll fall away. They'll do what they want to. A judge will be raised. An enemy will be raised. God will use those two to pull Israel back and to force off any enemy. So we're in that stage of life, in that cycle where God is working in the nation. They're doing what's right. And we're introduced to two characters, Ruth and Boaz, who are in the righteous arena. They're in the righteous character, and they're doing what's right. Now, what's also unique about the story is we really don't know why it was written in the sense that the book does not say, and we wrote this for this reason. Some scholars suggest that it was written sometime during the early life of David. Maybe not in the manner that we have here, which would be recorded and given the nation later, but written in a way to remind the nation that, yes, you had a previous king. God removed him. He was the one that you guys kind of wanted. But now David is the king. And David is not just any king. He's not someone who just comes and usurps the throne like happens so often in other nations and in Israel at times. But he's a man that God raises up out of a place that you wouldn't expect him. I mean, think about it. His family, according to what we know in his biographies later on in the Bible, tell him about he's a shepherd. His family's not rich; they're poor. They're not really set out in any way in the nation, and yet God reaches out and uses him, raises him up, brings him out. He destroys Goliath in a way that's very unique. He is known for taking care of his herd in a way that's very unique, and he stands out. And so, what part of this book does is it shows the nation his lineage. And what's unique about this lineage is his mother is a Gentile. She's a Goyim. She was originally an unchristian, an un-Jewish person who eventually comes to know God and worships him and becomes a righteous person in the nation of Israel. You also have to remember that Israel was originally set up, and God says this, that they were supposed to be an example to the Gentile worlds so that they understood what it was like to walk with God. This is an example, and we have a few of them in the Old Testament, of a Gentile individual who enters into the nation or worships God on his own. Methuselah is, Methuselah is one of these. And you see this in Ruth. And in fact, she's not just a person who decides to worship God, but she's a very righteous person, and her decisions are done quite well. So the story in chapter 3 starts off this way. Naomi and Ruth are together. The other daughter-in-laws have left. They've gone back to their families. They've walked away from God, but Ruth chooses to stay. And Naomi begins to realize that we have to do something. She's too old to get remarried, come up with two new sons that Ruth could marry, which was typically how the nation functioned. You got to remember, the nation at this time is connected to their land. And what would happen is if a woman was married to a man and he died, someone within the family would take her in as a wife. The land that would stay in that family, any riches or work that would go with it would stay with the family. And then when the children of that new marriage would grow up, that land would go to them. So what we get here is a concern that the land stays, that Ruth is taken care of, and ultimately Naomi as well. Because you got to remember, culturally, women just weren't going to get easily rich. Women weren't going to be treated real well. And so they have to think about this. There is no such thing as Social Security back then. That was your kids. That was your family. So they're stuck, excuse me, they're stuck in a place, excuse me, they're stuck in a place that they're dangerously poor. They're dangerous in their society because they're not being taken care of. Boaz is following the law that God gave them in Deuteronomy, where if there's poor people, they come in the land on the edges, the corners of the fields. They intentionally did not take, so that the poor could take it. So there was ways that the poor were taken care of. Boaz, when he sees Ruth, we know from a previous scene, takes care of her, lets her come in among her servants and actually take what really the law says she can't take or doesn't have the requirement to take. He gives it to her anyway. And he's taking care of her. Now, part of this is because of her character. Boaz talks about it in chapter 3. Other places you see it again. Ruth is a very unique person, and she's doing what's righteous. And people are seeing it. The society's seeing it and seeing that she should be taken care of. So what we have here is Naomi comes to Ruth and she says, look, we know they're at the threshing floor. There's going to be men down there. I want you to get dressed well, bathe, put on perfume, put on a new robe. One of the reasons why we think that's happening is that Ruth probably was dressed in a way that marked her off as a widow. And there'd be a period of time, sometimes quite long, where they would make marked off as a widow. And it would do a couple things. It would let people know who she is as far as her status in society, but also open up some doors to be taken care of. Naomi says basically, it's time for this to end. So go and change and begin to dress like someone who's looking for a spouse, someone who's willing to and able to get married. She also sends Ruth down into the threshing floor at night. And the reason this is a unique thing is because we do know from historical documents that prostitutes and stuff would also meet them down at the threshing floor because the men were away from their families, could get away from some stuff that was absolutely incorrect, unlawful, sinful, but they would do it anyway. And so she sends Ruth down there. She tells her very, very clearly that, look, wait till they're done threshing, wait till they eat, wait till he's had some drinks to get relaxed with, probably wine of some sort. And when he falls asleep, go in next to him, uncover his feet. Now, this is a place in translation that some people try to make it sound like she offers to have sex with him. The problem with the Hebrew there is that the word, that phrase, uncover his feet, has the opportunity to mean a couple different things. It does actually mean to reveal your sexual organs to someone. It does have the opportunity to mean to uncover your feet and use a restroom. So it's an idiomatic phrase that can kind of mean a lot of things. The best way to translate it's an ancient Near Eastern Israelite way of saying aloha. Aloha can say hi, it can say goodbye, it can say good morning. It's a word that's used so many different ways, but the context is what drives it. That's just went on here. Now, what the author did as he's writing this is he picks a word that doesn't mean feet. It actually is translated better, legs. And we think what the author's doing there is trying to keep them away from thinking that she's going to do something sexual. Instead, what she's doing something revealing. She's doing something that something like maybe an unusual hug, something like maybe an unusual interaction, something that marks her off as something different and unique and marks her off as someone who is willing to get married. This is important. So what the text tells us is she goes in, she waits, she falls asleep, she listens to Naomi perfectly. And she goes in, she waits till he falls asleep. She lays down beside him. In fact, Boaz, as says, he looks at his feet and sees her. So she lays low on his body, uncovers his feet. This could also be to wake him up. It gets cool, your feet get chilly, it wakes him up. But whatever it does, it gets his attention. He asks who she is, recognizes who she is, and begins to tell her, you're a great person. You're a wonderful person. We all know who you are. And what you've done for Naomi and this family is very unique and very righteous. She then says, look, you're a redeemer. The formal phrase there is a kinsman redeemer. This is that phrase that comes out of the law that says, look, you're the one that's closest to us in family, and you would be the one who'd be most likely to marry me, redeem me and the family, and protect us. Boaz, who is extremely aware of what's going on. In fact, we see when he first meets his servants, he yells to them a basic blessing in Israelite, and they respond back. So they know of him as a righteous person. So he quotes back to her and says, wait a minute, there is someone who's closer. All he's simply saying, he's not trying to get out of this. He's simply saying there's someone who should marry you or have the first option because he is actually closer and that would fit the law better. He then takes her, he gives her food, he says, go out of here. By sending her away from the threshing floor, a couple things happen. One is he protects her image. There's no way of thinking that she went down there to make some money in the sex trade. There's no way to make her appear that she went down for some ulterior motive. He recognizes why she went. Here's her story as to why she came because of Naomi, explains how she figured this out. She's not an Israelite, remember, although the threshing floor had been common in many of the ancient Eastern societies. And he actually sets her up to go home and stay there. Just don't get changed. Stay in these robes, stay in this clothing, recognizing that she is potentially one he can marry. We know from the later story that how it works out, but for this particular scene, I want to hit on a couple key things. First is it tells us how God works. Sometimes God, Yahweh, works in ways to bring someone into our lives. In this case, it would be Naomi. And he works through them to get communication to Ruth, who wouldn't know the ancient Eastern Israelite text, and help guide her. It also says something about Ruth in the sense that she is trying to do what's right. God is the author of right, and she's willing to follow a righteous person and do what they're saying. So one of the things it tells us from just a pure applicational side is that when someone comes into our lives who is a respected Christian, take their advice. Listen, do what they tell you if you know it's right, and watch how God works. The second thing that it does is it shows Boaz, this distant person, not an outsider, but a distant person to Naomi's family. And he is also righteous. And he's doing this right. And he's not just falling into the fact that Naomi is someone who he might be attracted to, or should be Ruth. And it's also not someone that he knows about Naomi and wants to do something nice for, but he's also trying to follow God's standard. One of the things that we as Christians do is we have a lot of freedom in our Christian walk, a lot of freedom. Some of it is guided and bounded by the law in Jesus at this stage in the game, and some of it is bounded just simply by examples in Scripture. And what Boaz is doing is something that we often struggle with as well, and that is trying to walk with God, try to walk with Jesus, maintain our freedom that God gives us, but at the same time, make sure it aligns with the Bible and the righteousness that Jesus teaches. The story ends with Ruth going back to Naomi, Boaz going out there to the other kinsman redeemer. And we actually don't get his name in any serious way. In fact, his name is referred to in such a way that it's basically the other guy. And we're left with a story where we begin to wait. Now, again, going back to why this story is written, these characters who ultimately become the parents of David, the king that ultimately all the other kings want to be like, Jesus talks about how great a guy he is. Even though he has some character flaws, we see that his family is initially made up of righteous people. And it is really interesting to watch how God uses whoever he chooses to when they choose to walk with him. The story is a great story. If I were you, I would continue to read through it. And I've actually read through it a couple of times and ask questions of the text. Say, God, what are you trying to teach me here? Any Old Testament story is designed to tell us about Israel's history, Israel's character, God's character, and ultimately how it leads to Jesus. There's a way of reading the Old Testament that you should be aware of as well. There is a couple different readings of an Old Testament text. The first is to read it like it's a historical document, just a history, and you read the story that way. That's kind of how we're going through it a little bit. But also in Acts, when Jesus is resurrected, he meets the people on the road to Emmaus. And he tells them, he says, look, go back and read the Old Testament in light of me, Jesus, who is the new Messiah and ultimately the salvation that you need to get to God. He says, go back and read the Old Testament there and look at how it points towards me. This is an example of it. In the New Testament, we have Mary, who is a woman who is a central character in the birth of Jesus. Here we have Ruth, a Gentile, who is a central character in the birth of the family leading to David. It's amazing how God works. Sometimes we sit back as Christians and sit back as people who are seeking whether to follow Jesus or not. And we wonder why things happen the way they do. And sometimes we're confused. And we have phrases that joke about, let God do what he wants to do, or we joke that, I'll trust him and follow him along. This is an example of a story where God knows exactly what he's doing. And he does some very, very unique, very, very interesting things, but not outside of his character. Again, it takes us back to an applicational element where if God is doing something and you're unsure why he's allowing it, go back to his Bible, read it, and see what it tells you about him. God is clearly a loving God. In the Old Testament, he can clearly be a warrior God. He reappears that way in the book of Revelation. His character doesn't change. What changes is how he interacts with us, how he draws us to him, and how we become followers of Jesus, followers of God, and righteous people. I hope you enjoyed this very short reading of chapter 3, this little bit of application and a little bit of history that's going on. It's actually an easy chapter. It's a fun chapter. I encourage you to keep reading it. Keep following Rob, the reluctant chaplain. He's a good man. He's trying to do a good thing, and I think you enjoy it. Have a great day. I'll talk to you soon.